Welcome, everyone. I am Dr. Meghan Clark in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at St. John's University, and I am also with Dana Livingston, the co-chair of our St. John's CRS Global Campus Committee. And one of the things that we have committed ourselves to doing this year is to do a series of webinars that lift up and look at some ongoing and developing global crises that the committee feels are not getting sufficient attention within the news that here in the United States that we, and especially our students, get access to. One of the things that has lately started showing up a little bit more is the ongoing conflict and humanitarian crisis in Sudan. And it's only a little bit starting to show up because of the level of risk and the amount of people that the United Nations and others are trying to draw attention to in terms of both displacement and the risk of famine that is very, very real right now. For those who don't know, part of what we are very blessed to be able to do as a CRS Global Campus is to get the knowledge and wisdom of members of the CRS staff in some of our webinars. And so we are really blessed and privileged to have Cecilia Adalla with us today. She is the CRS Chief of Party of the Darfur Emergency Response Activity. And we also have with us the Reverend Dr. Elias Omondi from Hekima University College in Nairobi, who is now the director of the Center for Research, Training, and Publication at Hekima University College in Nairobi, where I, in 2015, was privileged to be a visiting faculty member of. And so since we got started a little late, because WebEx technology is always a little challenging when we don't want it to be, I'm going to jump right in and begin by asking Elias, if you could get us started. Over the past few years, there's been immense political change and instability in Sudan, at times where we had immense hope, and then that didn't quite materialize in the way that at least the Sudanese friends that I have had hoped. Can you speak a little bit about the political reality in Sudan and what happened a year ago in Khartoum that began the current conflict and what's been going on in Khartoum since?
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much, Meghan. Thank you for inviting me and St. John's and for your colleagues and your students. Yes, let me begin with the moment of hope that you just pointed to. Sudan has been under military rule for a very, very long time, actually now almost 53 years. And for a long, long period, it's been an on and off situation of instability. And we had one president or self-declared president who had conducted a coup, who was in power for 30 years, that is Omar al-Bashir. And the moment of hope that you just referred to, Meghan, was in April 2019. It was at this time that with protests that were led mostly by civil society groups, human rights groups, and women that came out in large numbers to say that the cost of living is so way up. There are many challenges that the country is facing. Unemployment rates are very high. And so this led into, I would say, a very, an internal coup, if you want, led by two army generals who were part of that particular mission. And Omar al-Bashir accepted to step down. He was already wanted by International Criminal Court for a number of atrocities that he had committed, particularly in Darfur, that Cecilia will talk about a bit more in detail. And so with that, there was a lot of hope. One, he opened up the religious space and then said that suspended the Sharia law with the coming in of the new leadership council that was put in place. But unfortunately, this did not last for long because the intellectual group and the civil society groups wanted to be included in the new transitional military council. And moving fast forward with all these tensions and a number of leaders that were put in place to lead the country resigning, there was an escalating tension, particularly between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces. The rapid support forces was mainly operating down in Darfur region, and with the blessing of Omar al-Bashir, and it was mainly to fight some of the sort of civil resistance movement that had emerged, calling for equal access to natural resources, recognition of a number of ethnic groups that had been marginalized. And Omar al-Bashir was able to fund General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo to lead this particular force. And actually, they collaborated with Abdel Fattah Burhan, who is currently the head of the Sudanese armed force, to overthrow the president or to push out Omar al-Bashir. But just a few months ago, there was a very swift turn of events when, again in April, 2 months ago, when we saw that Abdel Fattah Burhan, the head of Sudanese armed forces, and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who is also known as Hameti, the leader of the paramilitary rapid support force, in a sense began fighting because they wanted the integration into one military force, that the one that was led by Hemeti and the one that was led by the head of government, Abdel Fattah. So that's the situation that we are in, and this actually led into outblast war with serious humanitarian displacements. More than close to 5 million people have been displaced. Close to 25 million people are facing situations of hunger and food insecurity, and the situation that continues to be really bad. And there's less and less media attention now, and maybe we'll talk later about the regional countries that have also been involved. But in a snapshot, this is the current situation now that Sudan finds itself, and it's a very difficult and sad one because we had really high hopes that with the going away of Bashir, things were going to be a little better in the country. Mm-hmm.
It is a sad situation because there was such hope. I was in Khartoum in 2012 and met a number of doctors and young women medical students, and have good friends who are Sudanese professionals who live in Ireland and go back and forth with their family. And it was this real moment of hope, that very quickly the civil society, was not being given much space. And then you didn't really hear very much about what was happening until all of a sudden it erupted again. And as you noted at the end, and I'll turn to Cecilia now, the United Nations is warning that the humanitarian crisis in Sudan is one of the largest and most challenging that they've ever seen, with millions displaced and I guess 18 to 25 facing acute hunger. Can you share with us a little bit more about what's happening in terms of as a humanitarian crisis in Sudan and Catholic Relief Services response?
Thank you very much, Meghan, and very happy to be here to share some of what is going on and how Catholic Relief Services is responding. I have been in Sudan this time around for the last 7 years. As Dr. Elias says, we had hope in 2019, but that has now faded. The war in Sudan risks triggering the world's largest hunger crisis, Currently, as of the latest data we have, over 20.3 million people, which is about 42% of the total population, have been driven to high levels of food insecurity. It is forecasted that famine is looming, and this is really a sad situation. Sudan also faces the worst displacement crisis in the world. Out of the total population of the country, currently, as you alluded to earlier, 8.6 million people have been internally displaced since last April 2023. And this is actually 13% of all people displaced globally. In addition, we have over 2 million people who have fled to surrounding countries, mainly to Chad, Egypt, and South Sudan. Half of Sudan's population are in need of humanitarian assistance, and this represents about 20 million people. Over the years, Sudan has not really fully recovered from the conflict that started in 2004, but we were having hope a few years back. But now we realize that with this crisis, quite a number of people have been affected, especially women, children, men, and the elderly. People have been displaced multiple times. And with the current crisis, this is more, especially in the western part of the country, especially the Darfur region, the 5 Darfur states, the Kordofan region, and Khartoum, the capital. Many people have lost their livelihoods. The war has destroyed key infrastructure and constrained trade and production activities. There are diverse impacts of this conflict, especially when you look at the agricultural markets, employment, and food security, as well as this has impacted the region. Farmers are not able to plant due to the violence and displacement. The national food production is likely to be about half of the average. Food prices, from the analysis that has been done recently, are higher by about 73% if you compare that with the same period last year. This war has not spared the health facilities, hospitals and clinics, the few that are still not destroyed lack essential medicine. Children have not been in school since the war started in April last year. With the different fighting groups holding different parts of the country, or controlling rather, it's very challenging to import and bring in humanitarian assistance from other countries due to access issues. And of course, this is also, if you look at the high cost of transport because of the insecurities, anyone who agrees to bring in anything charges quite high prices. But with all this, the international community, especially the UN, the international NGOs, and the national NGOs, are still trying to deliver services, even under these very difficult circumstances. So what has CRS been doing? Despite these significant operational challenges and increasing humanitarian need, we have continued to provide critical humanitarian assistance to vulnerable communities across the Greater Darfur. Many of the agencies had to relocate out of Khartoum. Khartoum is very difficult to access, and we had to figure out how to set up new places, new operational places, and continue in areas where we are still able to be. CRS currently, and in the past, we've been focusing on food security and livelihoods, health, nutrition, water and sanitation, peace building, and social cohesion is a core component of any program that we do. We focus also on child protection, climate change, and most recently with the Darfur emergency response activity, we are scaling up use of multi-cash assistance because we believe if we can provide cash where feasible, we are giving the communities dignity to choose what they can buy with the cash they get. In collaboration with WFP, CRS has been able, when we were able to get access again into the Darfur, we were able to bring in support to about 200,000 conflict-affected people in West and Central Darfur. They had access to food, which we got through WFP. This food composed mostly of sorghum, vegetable oil, lentils, and supplemental feeding for malnourished children. With USAID BHA support, CRS continued to provide life-saving health and wash and nutrition to vulnerable communities in Central Darfur. At this point, I must say, we were able to continue operation even when the war was at the gravest part of it, to 21 health facilities in Central Darfur. These operations continued even as the fighting was going on. Currently, with BHA funding, we were able, when we got access, to get in non-food items from Chad, and were able to access and bring in these commodities to West Darfur and to Central Darfur to provide assistance to the internally displaced households. Currently, we are looking at scaling up our multipurpose cash assistance and reaching more people. We are currently working on a strategic plan with different partners to see how we can work in terms of prevention, basically responding to the dire food security and trying to see how we can mitigate and work towards preventing actually the devastating things that might happen when famine really hits. We want to prevent famine. We are working very hard to access resources and make sure that we target communities and ensure that they have access to food. Over to you, Meghan.
Thank you. And just for some from scope and context, because in the United States, we are notoriously bad at understanding the scale of geography. And the Darfur region alone is the size of France. Sudan is a very large geographic country to begin with, but I was struck as you were talking, remembering about how many you've been able to reach and what you've been able to do in Western and then in Central Darfur. And so especially for our students who are watching or who will watch this, it's important to keep in mind that even in this one region that we're talking about, that region alone is about the size of France. And I'm wondering, Cecilia, when you talk about the efforts on the ground, and CRS has been in Darfur for a very long time, one of the things that's particularly sad is that I remember being a college student and learning about, and it was a different conflict that was raging in Sudan that did get a good bit of attention particularly from American actors like George Clooney and the like under the Bashir regime. When you mentioned, right, so we're dealing with a population that's experienced conflict and experienced displacement before. You mentioned that many of the internally displaced are displaced more than once. And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about what that reality looks like and how that might be an extra challenge for CRS trying to serve and meet the needs of people. Is it that they're continuing to have to move because of outbreaks of fighting, or What could you say a little bit more about what you meant when you said that they're displaced more than once?
Thank you, Meghan. From the Bashir time, if we recall, Darfur has been affected by conflict for over 20 years. Darfur is not new to conflict, violence, or displacement. Concerns have recently been raised that the Darfur is returning to the years of brutal fighting and increasing atrocities witnessed 2 decades ago. What is happening now is a complex situation. We have Darfur, which is divided into multiple ethnic groups. It's a home to about approximately 80 ethnic groups, encompassing both nomadic and sedentary communities. Tribal and ethnic conflicts are not common. I can say that the Darfur has experienced intermittent periods of reduced violence in recent years, but the situation took a drastic turn with the outbreak of the conflict in April between the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Response Forces. We have witnessed years of communal violence and displacement, and then we have returnees. In many of the humanitarian facilities have been looted and destroyed when the conflict erupted last year. In West Darfur, for example, hundreds of people are reported to have been killed, and this also impacted directly our humanitarian work. Because we had to evacuate quite a lot of our expatriate staff. We had to close offices until the situation calmed down a bit in some of the areas, and we were able to start having our national staff move back and see if we can restart the activities. When I say people have been displaced, in Darfur specifically, people have been displaced multiple times. Whenever conflict happens, if it's inter-ethnic, people get displaced. And when negotiations and peace-building efforts are put in place, some are able to go back into their communities. We have a number of people who are displaced into Chad during the previous Darfur conflict, and they do come back, sometimes to farm, and when they see the situation it doesn't look very favorable to them, they again go back into Chad to seek refuge. Now, when we look at Darfur and the Kordofan, there are areas of Sudan that also produce a lot of agricultural produce. And so what happens in Darfur and the Kordofan also affects the different parts. Now, currently, for example, in East Darfur, where we have one of our resilience programming ongoing, in addition to the Darfur emergency response activity, East Darfur currently has a very, very high number of internally displaced people, majority of whom came from Khartoum. And many of them get displaced, and when conflict reaches the areas where they seek refuge, they then have to move again. And so it's a very complex situation. But however, despite all this, CRS and other agencies are responding, and we are trying all efforts to get access and make sure that we provide the humanitarian assistance that is needed. Over to you, Meghan.
Thank you, Cecilia, very much. Elias, now Hekima has been part of doing research. One of the key components of Hekima is for those who are unfamiliar, is the Hekima Institute for Peace Studies and International Relations, which is really a research hub in the region. Can you say a little bit? I know that Hekima has been part of research involving Darfur and peace building. And can you say a little bit about that work, but then also as a peace studies expert, the complexity of peace efforts that may maybe have started, but maybe, maybe people are hoping will start, the complexities of trying to seek peace in Darfur. Just a second, you are on mute. Don't know what happened. There we go.
Okay, it's fine. All right. Yes, so we've been conducting as the Hekima University College quite a number of research in the last couple of years, looking particularly at the conflict trends, drivers, and also impact of these conflicts within the region. And we've looked at South Sudan, coupling with Sudan, Ethiopia, DRC or Democratic Republic of Congo. We've also done some research around West Africa. So the case of Sudan and Darfur particularly has also interested us very much because it's a very much a hotspot of quite a number of other conflicts that are happening within the region, including Chad, and then Egypt, and down in South Sudan itself. And just to explain a little bit for those who may not understand the relationship between South Sudan and Sudan, and how the dynamics of these particular conflicts are very important, is that this was one country for a very long time, up to 2011, when the southern region decided to separate from northern region, which was largely Arab, but these were all Africans. And then the north was largely Muslim to a great extent, and the south, traditional African religions and also Christian religions. And the south has all the oil deposits, but then the north has the refinery, and the oil has to be transported all the way to the north for refinery. Now, the conflict in Sudan, therefore, is affecting the economic situation in the south, because then refineries are not working to the capacity. The oil pipes may also be subjected to attack, and all kinds of instability are in the region. So talking of the peace process, South Sudan has been very much involved in that particular peace process because they see themselves as the immediate victims, economic victims of this, and also because there's a very symbiotic relationship between these two countries. We've seen a lot of effort from Egypt also coming in very strongly. But then remember, these two generals had worked already with the regional countries. Now, United Arab Emirates has been involved in both peace, but then in a rather suspicious manner, because they're supporting Hemeti, who is more of a Darfurian rebel leader, if you want to call him, from the Rapid Response Forces. So that makes it very difficult to trust the role of United Arab Emirates. We have the Russians and the Wagner Group that also has been operating a lot in the Darfur region, and particularly because of the gold, as we know, with the war in Ukraine. Russia's sanctions mean that now they're also struggling with their reserves. And so a lot of minerals that is coming out of the Darfur region that has also been enriching Hemeti as a general controlling that particular part. So we have had a lot of tension and issues for the Darfur region. Other peace efforts that we've seen and don't seem to be bearing much fruits, IGAD, which is the intergovernmental agency for development, has been very much involved in trying to broker peace on behalf of the African Union, but this has not borne much fruit. The government has the advantage of having the Air Force that can attack a number of regions within Darfur, or regions that are controlled by the RSF. But then, even with that, the RSF has very, very strong ground forces. So it's been very difficult. We thought it wasn't going to take this long, but it's already been 1 year since April last year to April this year. And we are hoping that with all the regional attempts, this is going to bring some change. Now, there's some complexity when we look at the peace in this particular region. One is that Somalia is generally unstable. And one of the strongest countries in the region is Ethiopia, that we had hoped was going to come in a bit more strongly. But Ethiopia is also dealing with its own conflicts in northern region of Tigray, and also Oromia region and Amhara region. These are regions controlled by some of the largest ethnic groups. And there's also tension between Ethiopia and Egypt, because Ethiopia is building one of the largest dams in the world, which is meant to be supplying electricity to most of the region. But then, to construct this particular dam, they have to interfere with the flow of the River Nile. And River Nile is the only source of life for Egypt, because Egypt, as we know, even from the stories in the Bible, relied so much on the Nile River. And so building a dam means cutting off the normal flow of water and irrigation and farming that Egypt relies on. So this has caused a lot of diplomatic tension between these two countries. So that means then that Egypt and Ethiopia would have different interests in Sudan for that very reason. So that again complicates the peace process. And African Union has not received the full support of all the countries because there are all kinds of tension and suspicions. For example, Kenya offered to support the peace process, but then the two generals did not agree to it, and they felt that Kenya will not be a neutral body. So that we are still in a what we may call a stalemate situation. We have a challenge of high proliferation of arms in this particular region, with most of these arms being supplied either by China, by Eastern European countries, as well as Russia. And that has just made it and Egypt as well. This has made it very difficult for the peace process to succeed. My only worry now is that because the rebel groups that were fighting within the Darfur region were also connected to Chad, and they were also connected to Libya, and they had sent mercenaries into these countries. So with all these people coming back, we are talking of close to 70 to 80,000 armed militia groups that were initially supported by the government to fight some of the rebel groups in Darfur region. The other challenge for peace is the ethnic and racial distinctions that seem to exist in the South, and maybe Cecilia can speak to that more specifically. Ethnic groups that have been now targeted, especially the African groups, and those that are seen not to belong very much closely to the government, the groups that have been fighting for their right to land, for their right to resettlement, and also for their right to access to the national goods of the country. So these particular groups are more and more being marginalized and being displaced 2, 3, 4 times, just as Cecilia was saying. And it has continued to create a very huge humanitarian situation, crisis. Partly because some of them want to go back, but then they are held hostage by some of the militia groups and some of the armed groups that are controlling these particular camps, because it gives them relevance. And that actually what helps them to perpetuate this particular conflict by using these particular displaced persons as pawns, if you want. Yeah, maybe that's what I can say for now. Mm-hmm.
That is incredibly helpful. And before I turn to the next question, I had one follow-up, which is, why was Kenya not seen as a neutral broker by the two generals? And the other is, in the chat, we have a question of clarification that the RSF the same as what 20 years ago we talked about as the Janjaweed in Darfur, or are they a different group?
Yes, RSF. Yeah, there used to be the Janjaweed, transformed into RSF with General Hemeti now, who is the leader of that paramilitary rapid support force group. And then why was Kenya not seen as a neutral party? One is because the leader of this paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, known as Hemeti or Mohammed Dagalo, he was hosted and given a red carpet reception in Kenya, which the government in Sudan saw as if it was a spat on their face, and meant also that they couldn't trust the Kenyan president, or they couldn't trust the government of Kenya as a neutral party, because this is not an official government representative. And why was he given such a reception in Kenya? And he's been very strategic, Mohammed Adalla. He's gone to quite a number of countries where he has had friends, and also to seek support for his own military venture. Yeah. So that's sort of the situation we are in right now in Sudan.
The diplomatic question in terms of, right, in Catholic social teaching, we would talk about how kind of those who should be able to help with peace negotiations are best if they are actually members of the region, and kind of people where you have relationships and it's closer to a situation, and so it's helpful as well to see and hear a little bit about both why it is that the countries that are politically stable aren't being acceptable as being able to shepherd a kind of peace negotiations, but also it raises as well the reality that is there's a lot of instability beyond just Sudan, and how this fits into a wider context. In the United States right now, we basically get 3 stories on the news, and that's it. The U.S. presidential election, what is going on in Israel and Gaza and Ukraine, and that's pretty much the extent of kind of what 24-hour cable news has brings to the widespread American people, unless they're looking at more independent kinds of PBS type media. And as you noted, right, in addition to Sudan, we have conflict in Ethiopia. We do not have a functioning situation in Somalia. When we talk about where people are displaced into Chad and into South Sudan, we're dealing with fragile countries that themselves are trying to develop. How would you kind of see, or how would you place this Sudan crisis within the context of what's going on in Ethiopia and in Eastern Congo, and anxieties about the political stability and elections that aren't just in the United States, but right, really do seem to be more widespread globally, but more widespread in East Africa. From your perspective, Elias, as somebody who looks at the politics of all of this, what do you see in terms of how Sudan relates to what's going on in Eastern Congo, what's going on in Ethiopia, and kind of these wider anxieties about elections, politics, and change?
Yeah, just to bring you back, since you made reference to the US as well, in May last year, which was just hardly a month after the conflict, US convened a sort of a peace talk in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah. But then that was only between RSF and SAF, that is the two army generals groups. But unfortunately, they left all the other bodies like the African Union and IGAD, and even Egypt and Chad felt, marginalized. And remember, Egypt and Chad are bearing the largest brunt of displaced persons moving in from Darfur, but also from other parts of Sudan. So that then drove Chad and Egypt to also convene another meeting in Cairo to see if they could resolve this particular conflict. So we've had those particular interests moving back and forth, but so far we've not really managed. But we've seen close to 25 states now joining the UN's Sudan mission with the intention of pushing more through the African Union the initiative for peace. So how is this now spilling over into the regions just beyond Sudan, Chad, Central African Republic, and South Sudan itself? Now, the case of Ethiopia, as I said earlier on, Ethiopia is in tensions with Egypt because of the huge dam that they are constructing, which will deny Egypt the flow of the Nile waters. But then Ethiopia itself, which should have been a very strong regional force, is preoccupied by its own conflicts within the region because it signed a peace agreement only with the Tigrayan forces. And the Tigrayan forces, even though they're only about 7 million ethnic group referred to as Tigrayans, or 7 or 14 million, but then they used to be in power for more than 25 years. So they have a lot of military control. And so when they revolted against the government after they were replaced, it meant the government became so weak militarily, but they won the conflict. But now other larger ethnic groups have also emerged in Ethiopia to claim for their right for recognition. So Ethiopia is an important player, and also Ethiopia hosts, the capital of Ethiopia hosts the African Union. So all the big meetings happen there, and they're supposed to be the ones playing the lead, but that hasn't been the case. Democratic Republic of Congo hasn't been so much involved in the Sudan conflict, but they are preoccupied very much with their own conflict in the eastern region, which now for the last 25 years has been very destabilizing. We have more than 100 armed groups in Congo, small and big. The largest is what we refer to as M23. That is after the failure of the peace talks that happened March 23, more than 10 years ago. And this particular group that operates mostly in the area of Goma or eastern region of Congo is very well armed, very organized, and has been a big threat to peace and stability in eastern region. Now, recently, the UN produced a report that showed evidence of Rwanda supporting the M23. Human rights groups have raised this concern. Congo has accused Rwanda of supporting the M23. Now, M23 are claiming for the rights of a group known as the Banyamulenge, who have existed there for many, many years. They're claiming their right to citizenship and recognition. But then they are closely linked to the Rwandan president's ethnic group, the Tutsis. So the Banyamulenge are also known as Tutsis, in other words, and they're claiming for their right, which I think it is right. And to say that they should go back to Rwanda is an anomaly, and because they've been there for over 200 or 300 years. So they're actually Congolese, and they need to be given a right to that recognition. But then the political situation in Eastern Congo is also very murky. There have been cases of neighboring countries exploiting the minerals in Congo. Congo has one of the richest resources of minerals, producing especially the coltan, which is very important for your cell phones. And that's close to 60% of the world production comes from Congo, of coltan. And also is important for the lithium batteries, which, as we move towards a climatically friendly technology, we are going to rely a lot on the lithium batteries, and we still rely on Congo for this particular special metal. And that has meant that so many groups, international groups from Western countries are exploiting these particular minerals. And in a sense, ignoring the conflict that is going on, it favors so many multinationals to just continue to exploit Congo in this manner. So the instability and the peace process in Eastern DR Congo hasn't moved really that much, yet we have close to 230,000 people who are now facing a terrible situation of hunger. And around a quarter of the population, 23.4 million people are facing crisis levels of hunger and even worse situations, where with more than 6-7 million people also displaced. And internal displacements are sometimes much higher than external displacements in Congo. So I could leave it at that unless you have some more questions.
No, that is great, and a big part of what why I asked the question was to get a sense of what is a concerning. So when we talk about kind of humanitarian crises and conflicts that are not getting, that people aren't paying enough attention to globally, Sudan is an excellent one to lift up because of its current emergency level, but also because it also draws us into thinking about a particular region in which there is a lot more going on, and in which you see the global interdependence so deeply, right? Because people may not think that what goes on in Darfur impacts people outside of Sudan, or what happens in Congo outside. And yet the reality is that when you have conflict, right, that minerals and agriculture and all of these things are both, right, the cause of the lack of them, or the cause of, lead to humanitarian crisis, but the presence and desire for control of them can really fuel conflict. I was also struck by how in the background of all of this is just the sheer proliferation of small arms, and how this is something Pope Francis talks about a lot, about the really, he calls them evil, but the proliferation of weapons that we see. Cecilia, I know CRS is, I joke with my students all the time that CRS is basically everywhere. Anywhere that there is the need, there is a humanitarian crisis, you can, and if you can't find CRS, you can find another member of Caritas Internationalis on the ground. I'd like to ask you to share a little bit about where the efforts in Darfur fit in with what CRS is doing in the wider region. But I'd also like to ask specifically, one thing I'm always struck by when I look at conflict is within these situations, how in the livelihood programs and in other programs, the strength and resilience of women within the communities that are being displaced and are trying to recover and are surviving in the midst of all of this. And so I also wanted to ask if you could share what you're seeing in terms of women's role in maybe just little efforts for peace and survival, but on the ground in Sudan.
Thank you very much, Meghan. And you are right, CRS globally, we are in more than 110 countries. And in East Africa, our East African region is the largest among the CRS regional offices. The East African region serves Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda. And we have countries in East Africa that have had high-profile emergencies. You are looking at Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan. And so there's a linkage between how we do our work and how we look at how we can do programming in a more meaningful way. We have the largest food program in Ethiopia. We've also had a very large food program in South Sudan and also in Sudan, working with partners like World Food Program, and also getting funding for our resilience programs from USAID, BHA, and different bureaus within US government. And also in the past, we had quite a huge resilience funding from FCDO, which before was called DFID, the UK agency. Now, in terms of looking at the emergencies, the Sudan emergency, when we look at it, it's actually a regional crisis because we look at the displacement of over 2 million people outside Sudan, mainly in Chad, Egypt, but we also have them in South Sudan. We have some who've gone to Ethiopia. And sometimes we forget there are quite a lot of Ethiopian refugees in Sudan, and these have also been displaced multiple times, Ethiopians and Eritreans, and Chadians as well, and Central African Republic refugees in Sudan. Now, to go to your question about the resilience of women in both active and humanitarian crises, the Sudan conflict has impacted very large numbers of women, children, and the elderly, and especially other vulnerable groups. We've been internally displaced, and we've had quite huge significant cross-border movements to neighboring countries because of the fear and also the atrocities that many of their families and they themselves have suffered. So when we look at women's role, especially in peace, we are specifically focusing on the local level peace processes, and especially in the Darfur, all the 5 Darfur states. And we look at people leading in including peace committees in activities that we do, but we also realize that men dominate these peace committees because there's usually the exclusion of women with the notion that peace and leadership is a men's agenda. So intentionally, we try to be aware of this, and in our projects, we use the projects and resources to create space for women because we know that they bring in a very big impact when they participate. Many of the women are working towards the anti-war led initiatives, and many have formed coalitions and civil and political groups, especially in different geographical regions within Sudan, and they are trying to enforce their efforts towards peace in Sudan. Currently, we know that there are so many Sudanese women groups who have mobilized to address the conflict situation in the country. Many of them are having very different multiple roles in response to the war, and they are actively promoting peace and denouncing the hostilities and advocating for participation of women and young women in all the humanitarian efforts and peace initiatives. I have to say we've been really impressed with the number of women who've come up and are working hard in providing assistance and coordinating and arranging shelters where they are hosting IDPs. I'm sure you've heard about the very innovative emergency rooms that have been created to support distribution of relief, create what we call the kitchen soup spaces, where they are providing food for those who are displaced and have no access to food. And we know that quite a number of the women are working towards monitoring and documenting human rights violations, especially the gender-based violence that currently is sadly really going on in many parts of Sudan. It's not only Darfur, it's also in Khartoum and other areas, the Kordofans. And they're quite a very vibrant, big women groups who are leading peace initiatives, humanitarian initiatives, and they're bringing together civil organizations to ensure that at least there's activities going on to try and bring peace and reconciliation in their communities. Over to you, Meghan.
Thank you very much. And I was at a meeting at the United Nations once, not that long ago, was when they were going over, and there were debates in the General Assembly about the sustainable, I guess it would be 2015 to set the Sustainable Development Agenda. And a young woman who I think she had been she'd been a medical student, who in the wake of the Arab Spring had become a youth activist and human rights voice. And she got up and she said to the full General Assembly and challenged them and said, why is it that is access to the peace table, the price of admission, the ticket is a gun? Then why is it that it seems that the admission ticket to the peace table for negotiations is a gun? And challenged that women and young people needed to be given seats at the table when in peace negotiations. And we know that peace plans are significantly more long-lasting and effective when women are at the table, and not just the leaders of armies and militias and the like. And so it's always important to hear about the small ways that women are creating those spaces when they're blocked from those other kinds of more institutional peace negotiations. We are just about out of time, and since we didn't start with one, I will end with a prayer. But I wanted to very quickly ask if Cecilia or Elias, is there anything that you had wanted to say that hasn't come up?
From my end, no, I think what we are struggling with is actually the limited funding and the limited focus on the Sudan crisis. Mm-hmm. It's been going on for over 1 year now. And the humanitarian funding that has been allocated to Sudan is really very small. And our real need is advocacy to many different organizations to also see Sudan as a priority, like any other emergency in Ukraine, Gaza, and other parts of the world, and the Congo. So we do want to make sure that people live with dignity and they're able to get humanitarian assistance in a meaningful way. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, what I would just like to add is something I didn't quite respond to, is just how important it is to address a number of these conflicts. I think Africa now, we are almost into kind of a third dispensation after the post-independence, many countries celebrating 50, 60 years of independence from the colonial powers. We had the first rule of the Africans, and then a few countries faced military coups, and then some stability in the 90s with emergence of democracy and elections and all that. But now there's a whole new wave of a search for a model of governance that is much more inclusive. Because countries like Sudan, which have been under military rule, democracy has never been that much of a big priority. But there's a lot of push, and these are the ripple effects of seeing these women, because you've talked about the role of women in peace, large number of women that came out to demonstrate against a military leader that has been there for 30 years and succeeded in removing him out of power. But it was only because the negotiation between the intellectuals and these women and civil society groups was shortchanged by the military that were not ready to give up power. But there's a new momentum now of really a search for a much more inclusive system of governance. And I just hope that with the elections of coming in South Sudan in 2020, this year in December, fragile as it may be, it may provoke some conversation around what are other alternatives of governance, even if it's not democracy, as long as it is inclusive and it gives people a voice and it takes care of people's needs, so that we don't have this perpetual situation of humanitarian crisis that we keep seeing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both Elias and Cecilia. And as we conclude, this is a kind of riff off of the prayer of St. Francis. It's one of Catholic Relief Services' prayers for peace. Make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, let us offer pardon. Where there is discord, let us build peace. O divine Lord, you taught us that those who work for peace are called children of God. Help us to persist in establishing justice and truth as firm and lasting foundations for peace. Lord, you offer us peace as a gift and peace as a responsibility that we must realize with your help. Give us the grace to reach for peace, to have attitudes of peace, that our words may be of peace, and that our works be works of peace. Then may we build the peace that we and our nations need. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you once
Amen.
again to Cecilia and Elias and to all who were joined. And thank you to all who will watch on YouTube. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Okay, cheers, bye.
Bye.